The Colemans from Illinois were the perfect family. There was a husband and wife who loved each other very much, and two very well-behaved sons. The family had a very nice house, prayed with each other every night, and regularly attended church together. But in the fall of 2008, the Colemans suddenly began receiving threatening letters and emails. Someone seemed to have a lot of hatred for them and wanted to kill them. But before the police could locate the sender of the emails, a gruesome crime unfolded at the Colemans' home. But nobody could have ever foreseen what shocking truth was behind this crime. The Coleman family. The Coleman family consisted of 34-year-old father Christopher, his wife Sherry, and their two sons Garrett and Gavin. They lived together in a large house in the suburb of Waterloo, Illinois. Christopher was on the road a lot, since he was working for the TV evangelist Joyce Meyer. Joyce Meyer is a Christian preacher who travels throughout the USA to give speeches, preach, and hold services. She was always accompanied by an entourage that Christopher Coleman was a part of. He was her head of security. Christopher loved his job, especially because he was able to travel and explore other cities. But his job was also well paid, which is what was footing the bill of the Coleman's luxurious lifestyle. Faith also played an important role in Sherry's life, and so the two of them prayed together with their sons every evening and attended church regularly. Sherry and Christopher seemed very happy, but then, their peaceful life was suddenly disrupted. The threats. November 14, 2008 was the first time that Christopher received a threatening email in his inbox. It said, "Time is running out for you and your family." In the days and weeks that followed, this email was followed up by many more. The sender had a problem with Joyce Meyer, the TV evangelist who Christopher worked for. He wrote that anything Joyce would preach for was nonsense, and Chris would have to pay for it if he didn't quit his job. The emails, coming from the sender destroychris@gmail.com, became increasingly aggressive and more threatening, which is why Chris eventually reported the issue to the police. This is when the Colemans got police protection. In the following month they received more emails, but Chris and Sherry felt safe, thanks to the cops, so they were able to carry on with their life. On April 27, 2009, Chris received his last threat which said, "This is my last message to you. Your worst fears will soon be reality." Then it was initially quiet for a little while. Sherry had hoped that this nightmare would finally come to an end, and that they could get on with their lives as usual. But their hopes were shattered. The murder. It was early in the morning on May 5, 2009, when Chris called his neighbor, a police officer who knew about the threats. Chris told him that he went to gym earlier than usual this morning and was now unable to get a hold of his family. He was concerned because Sherry would usually already be awake at this hour. The neighbor had installed a camera in Chris' driveway, but couldn't find any suspicious in the footage. The police patrol, which had passed by the house only a short time earlier, also reported no out-of-the-ordinary observations at the Coleman house. The neighbor still notified the police and then went with the other cops to the Coleman's house. From the outside, everything seemed calm and peaceful, so the men were not prepared for what they would encounter on the inside. Phrases like, "Now you have paid," and "I'm watching you," were written on almost all of the walls of the house in red spray paint. It looked like someone made do of their threats. And sure enough, the cops found Sherry and their sons dead in their beds. They had been strangled. Sherry was showing obvious defense marks. She clearly put up a fight against whoever killed her. Shortly after, the ambulances and further police cars showed up at the residence. Chris arrived as well. The cops notified the worried father of two that they had found the bodies of his wife and their sons. Chris didn't ask what happened. He also didn't try to push his way past the cops into the house. Instead, as video footage shows, he went into the front yard, sat down on the lawn, and started crying. While the media and neighbors were feeling sorry for him, the police interpreted his behavior as odd. They thought his tears and grief seemed forced, and they walked out into the front yard like a spectacle. But that wasn't the only thing that appeared odd. The paramedics who were looking after Chris noticed that he was having deep scratches down his arm. They confronted him about them, which is when he told them that he had punched the ambulance wall out of anger, which supposedly had caused him to sustain these injuries. But that story was not consistent with his wounds. From that point forward, Christopher Coleman was the prime suspect in his own family's murder case. The investigation. The police immediately began investigating Christopher. They double-checked the surveillance footage of the Coleman's driveway. There, Chris could be seen leaving the house about 1 hour before he called his neighbor. That made investigators wonder, because the autopsy of Sherry and the children indicated that they had been dead hours before Chris leaving the home. When they were found, the bodies were already cold and stiff. Christopher was interrogated and confronted with these facts, but he denied everything, insisting his family was still alive when he left home. He also referred to the threats he had received over the past few months. Chris didn't give investigators anything else to work with during the interview, but they sure were curious about why Chris was always the one who was threatened in the emails, and now he's the only one who survived. So they examined his computer and cell phone, and what they found was astonishing. At first, investigators checked into the IP address of the email destroychris@gmail.com, and they noticed that all threatening emails were sent directly out of the Coleman's house. But that wasn't all that led them to believe that Chris was the one who killed his family. Tara Lintz. The police found messages from a certain Tara Lintz on his cell phone. Tara was a childhood friend of Sherry's, who now worked nearby as a waitress at a cocktail bar. And the more investigators read on Chris and Tara's text messages, the clearer it became that the two had been having an affair since October 2008, so exactly a month before the threat started. Throughout the month, Chris had used his job as an excuse to stay away from home longer and meet up with Tara. Sherry was used to her husband having to travel a lot, so it didn't surprise her when Chris was away for a weekend. Police found numerous videos and messages in which Tara and Chris swore each other never-ending love and happiness and talked about getting married. In their messages, they daydreamed about the beautiful marriage they would soon have. But Chris was already married to Sherry, which of course put him in a bind. He wanted to be with Tara, but in order for that to happen, he would need to get a divorce from Sherry. And Joyce Meyer, his boss, was very religious. She absolutely condemned extramarital affairs, as well as divorces. And there had been incidents in the past where co-workers had been fired over getting divorces. Christopher was afraid that the same fate would await him, which is why he repeatedly pacified Tara and postponed his divorce. But at some point, Tara did not want to play along anymore. In April 2009, she gave Chris an ultimatum. Either he would divorce Sherry by May 4th, or she would break up with him and make their affair public. Chris assured Tara that he was going to get a divorce for real this time. When the deadline came around, she called him and he told her that the divorce papers were all drawn up and that he was going to hand them over to his wife the following day. But instead, Sherry's, Garrett's and Gavin's dead bodies were discovered the next day. This led investigators to believe that this was the motive for the murder. Further research supported the theory. Investigators checked Sherry's cell phone. On it they found messages that Sherry had written to her friends. She told them that Chris wanted to file for divorce and was very aggressive towards her. He had yelled at her and blamed her for ruining his career. According to him, she and the children were destroying his life. Sherry also wrote that she was afraid that Chris would harm her. By that point, the DNA that had been found under Sherry's fingernails came back from the lab. It was determined to belong to Chris. The final piece of evidence, which probably wasn't even needed anymore, was Chris' credit card statement, which showed that he had bought red spray paint. More precisely, the spray paint that was used to write the threats all over the wall in the house. Shortly after that, one of Chris' neighbors contacted the police to report strange behavior. He stated that in front of the Coleman's residence, some of the neighbors had created a makeshift memorial for the boys and Sherry, where they would lay down flowers, stuffed animals, and light candles to honor them. He said that he observed Chris throwing all of the flowers and candles into the trash. After putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together, there was no doubt that Christopher Coleman murdered his wife and 2 sons in cold blood because he didn't want a divorce. The police still waited a while before arresting him, in order to collect as much evidence as possible to make sure that there was no chance of an acquittal incurred. In the end, the final autopsy report stated that the time of death was 3 AM in the morning. Chris himself had claimed to be at home at the time. On May 19th, Christopher Coleman was finally arrested. He still maintained his innocence. He said that he was hacked, which is why it looked like the emails were sent from his computer. Furthermore, he also insisted that his family was still alive when he left the house. But that wasn't enough for the jury. Chris was found guilty from the court and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was read, the prosecution made a statement saying that he felt how his young sons were dying under his hands. He didn't value their life. He deserved this punishment. And this once again brings us to the end of today's video. Christopher Coleman has murdered his wife and 2 sons in order to keep his affair secret and make sure that the public doesn't find out about it. Also, that he wouldn't lose his job and his luxurious lifestyle. Luckily, he was very sloppy when covering up his tracks, which is why he got what he deserved as a punishment for his cold-hearted, selfish actions. What is your opinion about this case? Please leave me a comment in the comment section. Thank you in advance, and I also appreciate you for watching. I'll see you again for the next video. Good night and see you soon.